Welcome to the Weekly Dose Podcast, your one-stop shop for the weekly news in incretin mimetic therapies, with your host, ManOnMounjaro, Dave Knapp. Welcome to a special edition of On the Pen, the Weekly Dose. I am Dave Knapp, ManOnMounjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. That's why you're here. And we are here to do a recap of today's Eli Lilly earnings call. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what I do at On the Pen. I'm excited to get into this a very interesting earnings call, an earnings call that definitely did not give us what we were expecting, if I am being totally honest, but it gave us plenty of information, and we're going to get into it all today. Thank you so much for being here. So the other day, I released a blog article, a news article on the website, OnThePen.com. If you're not following at OnThePen.com, please make sure you jump over there, sign up for email alerts, because this is another great way that we're getting information out there into the community. But I've dropped an article that basically outlined the things that we should concern ourselves with on the earnings call. So essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to go line by line through the things that we talked about the other day. And we're going to talk about how each of those things were addressed in the earnings call. So very, very fascinating information about the obstructive sleep apnea trial was dropped a couple of weeks ago. In my estimation and in the estimation of others, it was released a little bit early to sort of offset some of the terrible news that was coming out that week about the shortages going through June, right? So everything but the 2.5 milligram dose was basically put in a shortage through the end of June. And so on that day, they also released the top line data from the obstructive sleep apnea trial. Now, the main things that we wanted to talk about in terms of how this impacts members of this community, well, the first thing being, will the approval by the FDA for the sleep apnea indication be a backdoor way into people who have Medicare Part D insurance to get Zepbound? Now, currently, you can get semaglutide and you can get tirzepatide if you are on Medicare, if you're a diabetic. And then that used to be the case exclusively until the SELECT trial data was dropped for semaglutide for those with heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. That was approved by the FDA, that indication for Wegovy. And then you saw subsequently that the approval led to the formularies for Medicare Part D, certain formularies for Medicare Part D, pick up Wegovy. So sort of a backdoor way into getting that medication if you had been looking to get on Wegovy. So the question was, will this obstructive sleep apnea data ultimately lead to that? And so we did get a little bit of insight today from the Lilly executives, and they do expect that the readout for that, which will take place, the full readout will take place in June at the American Diabetes Association conference, and will be submitted to the FDA at that time. And so essentially what we could see is this year, by the end of this year, we could see Zepbound added to Medicare Part D formularies for the treatment of obstructive sleep apnea, provided the FDA approves it. And that would be the caveat. I think they will, and I think it'll be the first treatment, the first medicine treatment for obstructive sleep apnea. And that is just a phenomenon if you're somebody who struggles with sleep apnea. Now, interestingly enough, there was some other sort of interesting news on the obstructive sleep apnea trial that came out of this earnings call, and that was that the 70% of the trial participants in the obstructive sleep apnea trial were male. And that sort of bucks the trend, because in most of these studies, there's a slight majority female representation in these studies, but 70% were male. And The titration schedule was a little bit different because you saw people sort of stop at 10 if that's what they tolerated the most, and then others went up to 15. So it was 10 milligram and 15. And interestingly enough, you saw 20% weight loss on average across that population, which is a very difficult population to achieve those kind of weight loss results. And, it not being a weight loss study, it being an obstructive sleep apnea study, was just sort of an interesting bit of information to come out of that. So we do expect, at least Eli Lilly does expect, that they will receive the FDA indication this year for the treatment of obstructive sleep apnea with tirzepatide, and that will likely be added to Medicare Part D. So in the same vein, you've got a trial wrapping up for heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, similar to the SELECT trials for Wegovy. You've got the same trial happening for tirzepatide, and that trial will also wrap up towards the middle of this year. So you'll see similar things where likely they will submit top-line data really quick, and then you'll get the full readout perhaps at the American Heart Association conference with a subsequent submittal to the FDA. And by, this time next year, you could see that indication as well. So 2 different indications that will be a backdoor way for our Medicare Part D friends to get on these medications. So that will be a fascinating thing to follow. Those are 2 big things that we were looking at with this earnings call. Now, moving on to the acquisition of manufacturing plants. Something very interesting happened before the call even started, and that was that they released their slide deck that they go through on the earnings call. And I always like to go through this before the call so we sort of know what we're getting into. And as I read through the key events that had happened leading up to this earnings call, what was noticeably absent was anything about the FDA approval of the single dose vials. And so right away I thought, we're not going to get the news we're looking for today. Hopefully that these Wall Street investment houses would see fit to ask about them. And so we'll get a little bit into that a little bit farther along. But the big thing that jumped out off the page at that time was that they were adjusting their earnings for through the end of the year by $2 billion. In other words, they looked at the rest of the year and said, we're going to make $2 billion more than we thought. Now, out of the same side of their mouth, they're talking about how they cannot meet demand for tirzepatide and how there's basically a 50% greater demand than there is a supply. Yet at the same time, they are adjusting their forecast for the rest of the year by $2 billion. So something does not add up. And so when pressed on this, and this sort of gets to the manufacturing plants, Anat Ashkenazi, who is the CFO, usually handles these types of questions. And Anat Ashkenazi essentially said, here's the deal. We've got these manufacturing plants. We just purchased one in Wisconsin that will be coming online at the end of 2025. Okay, that doesn't help earnings this year. And then she alluded to the Concord plant, which is coming along maybe a little bit faster than they thought, but still what the Concord plant would be contributing to the supply would have already been baked into these numbers. And so you saw towards the end of the call, this did not really true up with some of the investors. And for some reason, they were stuck on the QuickPen idea, because very early on in the call, we learned that the QuickPen was obviously approved in the UK. We knew that wasn't news, but the over in Europe, they also approved the pen, and they've got manufacturing facilities over there that are already making the pens. So they'll be launching Mounjaro over there. And so I think this sort of got them thinking in the way of the quick pens and how much easier it is to bring to market. So there was a question near the end where one of the investment houses basically said, I'm having a hard time truing up this $2 billion. And basically it was like, hey, we're buying up manufacturing capacity, but nothing new was announced. So we'll get into the release the vials part of this, but I thought that was a very interesting answer, because there was definitely no clear answer given to where that $2 billion was coming from, other than Basically, what they cited was an increased insight into their manufacturing capacity. And so I really think that if you read between the lines there, they're not adding factories, right? Nothing's coming online significantly faster, but they're adjusting their earnings by $2 billion. I think that the release the vials part of this, or release the quick pens, which are not approved, the vials are approved. We also heard again reiterated that Mounjaro will remain Mounjaro where it's being approved overseas for those other indications, the weight loss indications specifically. They're not rebranding it. So we know that when the Zepbound vials were approved, they were approved for the American market. So even though it was not addressed on this call, it sort of seems like that could be where this $2 billion is coming from. They just may perhaps not have been ready to discuss it or to discuss the details. I'm sure there are a lot of things to work out, but I still fully anticipate that we will see other presentations. In fact, we heard from the Lilly executives that they are sort of taking a all options are on the table approach as far as different presentations in different markets to try to keep up with the supply. But we also heard that through 2025, the supply is going to exceed, the demand is going to exceed the supply in very significant and dramatic ways, and that really they're hanging their hats on the approval of orforglipron, the small molecule GLP-1 receptor agonist that's in a pill form, but they don't expect the launch to happen until 2026. So if they're going to have to find other presentations if they want to continue to meet demand and satisfy investors. So although that was not addressed on this call directly, as far as release the vials, it was more framed in the within the framework of the quick pens, whatever it is, whatever the presentations are that allow this drug to come to market faster. They're exploring all options, and I wait with bated breath. I think it'll happen maybe even before the next earnings call, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. But, you do have some really good news in the acquisition of that plant over in Wisconsin, which we've already documented well on this channel. It's an FDA-approved facility. And the good news about this facility is that it manufactures vials, injectable medications and vials. So I was interested in hearing maybe why they didn't expect it to contribute until the end of 2025. That sure seems like a long way off. Gina with a $50 super chat. Thank you so much for that generosity, Gina. I greatly appreciate that. That is extremely generous and kind. Thank you. 10% of all the gifts this month are going to go back to one paid member on this channel. That's what we're doing every month here. So any gift that you give, something's going to go back into the community to help them offset the cost of their medication. At least that is the spirit of why we do it. But thank you very much for that generosity, Gina. I very, very much appreciate it. So that's the rub on the manufacturing facilities and the plants. The release the vials thing, we didn't get the answer we were looking for. Frankly, I was fully expecting it today. I just couldn't imagine that you saw the FDA approval and then they not move on it. And I still stand by that. I just don't think that the timing was quite right to announce it yet. I think there are logistical things they have to figure out. But I do believe that we will be seeing this, so we will have to stay tuned on that. I want to give an opportunity for anyone, because we're doing this live here over on YouTube and Facebook. I would love to see any questions that you have about today's earnings call. Of course, this broadcast will be uploaded to the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast. This is sort of a special edition of the podcast. Wanted to bring you the deep dive. A few other things of note. Looking into the future, Eli Lilly is very focused on 9 different molecules for weight loss and diabetes, with an emphasis on the quality of weight loss, right? So weight loss without side effects, weight loss with less dosing frequency, weight loss that preserves muscle mass. And you see that the phase 2 trial for bimagrumab, which is some intellectual property that Eli Lilly acquired in the middle of last year, which is designed to help increase muscle mass. There was a trial already going on with semaglutide. So actually it's a semaglutide bimagrumab trial. I think ultimately you'll see that paired up with tirzepatide for better weight loss. Let's see what else was there. So this was big news, huge news, actually, right? Almost forgot to tell you about this one. So we learned today and we're introduced to a new molecule, a new tide. We always talk about all the utides, semaglutide, dulaglutide, tirzepatide. Today we learned about eloralintide. Eloralintide. Now that sort of middle part of that word, lintide, where do you recognize that from? Caglarintide. Caglarintide, which is Novo Nordisk amylin agonist. Well, eloralintide is a amylin agonist from Eli Lilly. And so it was very interesting to hear them talk about that specific molecule advancing to phase 2 clinical trials. And we also heard, and this isn't new news, but we heard about a monotherapy GIP agonist. So in tirzepatide, you sort of have GLP-1 plus GIP. So this is just a straight GIP agonist. And so I think it's more of an exploratory trial to see what GIP can do on its own. But very interesting to see eloralintide advance to phase 2 clinical trials and to just see them exploring different pathways for potential treatment of chronic weight management. So that was huge news. Welcome to the OnThePen channel, eloralintide. It is nice to meet you. We've got a couple questions here that Tiana Wells wants to know when the next investors call. So they happen quarterly. So once the next quarter wraps up, it's usually about 30 days after the quarter wraps up. So that's the frequency which with these happen. And of course, we cover them closely every time that they happen. And so I want to take a moment to just acknowledge the chat here because I kind of came into this stream with an agenda to get through. But Sue, Sandra, Anna, Matt, Tiana, Robert, Julie, Sandra, Lil Chi, Gina, thank you for being here. Amy, thank you for the $4.99 super chat. Really appreciate it. Brandy, thank you for being here. Appreciate you all being here. I'm going to open it up for any questions that you may have over the next couple of minutes. I think we've gotten to pretty much everything. There was a question about whether Eli Lilly foresaw retatrutide or tirzepatide being the future for NASH, non-alcoholic stadiopathic hepatitis, which is basically, the advancement of fatty liver disease. You see some really awesome top-line data that came out for tirzepatide, where it's melting liver fat, and very similarly to the way that retatrutide does, but retatrutide is expected to be even better with the glucagon component. So they're like, which is it going to be? Well, we did learn that we will get the full readout for that tirzepatide NASH study in June. Lots of information coming in June between that one and the full readout on the obstructive sleep apnea trial. And they talked about how the FDA will sort of have a hand in how those trials progress. Those are very difficult trials to do because, of course, when you're talking about livers, you have to do biopsies to measure the progress. So they're very expensive, very time consuming, and very hard to get the right people in the right places to do those trials. But I'm excited for that because what they're finding is you can reverse fibrosis. Like that's the headline to come out of these studies for NASH, is that we once thought that fibrosis was sort of irreversible. And now with the treatment of these peptides, you're able to reverse fibrosis, which ultimately leads to cirrhosis. So these are amazing advancements in liver disease. If you are somebody who struggles with liver disease or knows someone who struggles with liver disease. Scott said he cannot believe one of the investor questions was not about the vials. I could not either. I thought at a minimum, somebody from that investor group was going to say there's been an outcry sort of from patients about the vials. It seems like that would be a good way to meet demand, to increase revenue. And like, I go back to Scott. I go back to the fact that at the end of the day, the company has a responsibility to their investors. And it's only a matter of time before they link up, the capacity to make vials. I mean, they were asking the question today. They were just asking it the wrong way. They were asking about the quick pens. And to be honest with you, I don't think to many of us it matters. Give us the vials, give us the quick pens, just give us the medicine. Give it to us in a 5-gallon drum. Give it to me in a Camelback, those things you drink, you suck, through the straw that you carry on your backpack. I don't care what the presentation is. And I think at this point, the rest of the community is with me on that. Just give us the medicine. So I think it was asked, but it was not asked in maybe exactly the right way. And unfortunately, this isn't like a members of the press sort of thing. You have basically members of of investment houses, your TD Ameritrades and your Guggenheim and your investment houses. So if it was the New York Times or Bloomberg, we could probably sneak a question in there, but unfortunately we didn't get the answer that we were looking for. But I think that the door is wide open. There's $2 billion surplus or additional revenue that they're basically taking to the bank. And I don't think that's because they're going to see that many more pens made. I believe it will be additional presentations. I just don't think they were ready to talk about it. But $2 billion is, amounts to about 2 million extra monthly prescriptions of Zepbound or Mounjaro. And they did say that would be where the revenue is coming from because of the increased visibility into their manufacturing capacity. Even the wording of it was like, yeah, they didn't just say, hey, we can make more pens. They said, we have better insight into our manufacturing capacity. Okay, you're going to make the vials. So the FDA shortage currently, Kara wants to know when Mounjaro will go off shortage. And this is probably the biggest question that I got in all the comments of the videos that I did make today was what they say about the shortages. They said about the shortages that the demand is going to be 50% higher than the supply through 2025. This just underscores the need for the additional presentations like the single dose vials, like the quick pen, because they told us this is going to be a problem till orforglipron comes out, and orforglipron doesn't come out until 2026. So you put those pieces of the puzzle together and you go, this is going to be an issue for a long time. Sue wants to know if Mounjaro was a pill and it dropped on the floor of a Flying J's men's room, would I take it? Not only would I take it, yes, of course I would take it. If Mounjaro, that is an excellent hypothetical, Sue the Dude. Thank you for your contribution tonight. I would take it 100%. Just blow it off. It's still good. I think the other thing that's interesting to sort of drop in here is that you're going to see, it isn't as if like Eli Lilly is the be all end all here. Over this period of time, you're going to see caglarinotide hit the market. You're going to see high dose semaglutide hit the market. You're going to see some pressure on Eli Lilly. And matter of fact, one of the very interesting things, obviously this wasn't a huge focus of the Eli Lilly earnings call, but they actually lost scripts and lost ground to Ozempic, Mounjaro did, because of the shortages. And you can sort of get away with that kind of news when you're like, oh, by the way, we're also increasing our earnings forecast by $2 billion. Oh, yeah, by the way, we're losing ground with Mounjaro and Ozempic because we can't get the medicine in people's hands, right? And so I think that that pressure, you can only sort of skirt around that for so long before investors start going, what's going on here? So I think that we will 100% see these new presentations. So I'm not deterred in the release the vials, movement. I don't think today was a loss. I just think it didn't come when it sort of made sense to us. But again, we only have so much visibility into what goes on with their manufacturing capacity, et cetera. So yes, Scott makes a great point. His doctor wants him to switch to Ozempic, so he went a different route. So that's a huge deal right now. I mean, you have people just looking in other directions, and they don't want that to happen for so long. Well, I really appreciate it. I want to make one more pass through my notes, make sure there was not anything else that I wanted to cover today. If you have any questions, now is sort of your last chance to put them in the chat. I want to thank everyone for following along. We did sort of an update moment by moment on OnThePen.com. Make sure you jump over there and sign up for email alerts when we drop new information. We've got a Novo Nordisk earnings call. Cloakster, thanks for the heads up. Novo Nordisk earnings call coming up on Thursday. Of course, we'll cover that as well. That will be very interesting to follow as well. Maybe get a little bit more insight into their pipeline. They've got some interesting stuff, some really interesting pathways that they're dealing with over at Novo Nordisk for chronic weight management. But I thank you for being here. Thank you for following along today. Make sure that you hit that like, hit that bell, hit that sub. Make sure you get notifications for everything that we do on this channel. Sue wants to know, will North Carolina come online soon? So it's always been by the end of the year that it'll be fully online. They anticipate that it'll be online even a little bit sooner than that. So it's coming along well. They're working hard. Hopefully we will have some more good news here, not only in the release of vials, but added manufacturing capacity. Hopefully they'll gobble up some more plants too. I'm sure they're doing their due diligence to find wherever there are some opportunities to scoop up some real estate and some FDA approved manufacturing facilities. But thanks again for being here. Appreciate all of you. Donna, good to see you. Thanks for jumping in here at the end. Thank you all for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen, and we will see you next week.